Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the Food System Summit. The food system leaders, vital frontline responders in the fight for zero hunger. My name is Teresa Welsh. I'm so excited to be with you all this morning. I am a reporter with DevEx. I cover food systems and nutrition, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to convene this conversation today with the Global Food Banking Network. Our conversation bridges two timely moments. We just celebrated International Women's Day on Monday, and the nutrition and food systems community is in the lead up into the Food Systems Summit, which we will see in September on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Today also marks the 1-year anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic being declared as such by the World Health Organization. And the past year really has shown us how vital food systems reform really is. So I'm so thrilled to be having this conversation with you all today. And there are so many reasons why it makes sense to bring together the particular topics of gender and food systems. As many of you may know, women and girls are disproportionately affected by food insecurity, something that COVID has only worsened. And existing hunger and nutrition data often masks the scope of gender inequality around access to food. So while women are more likely to go hungry and often eat last and least in households, they actually constitute the majority of smallholder farmers worldwide, and they're also typically responsible for making many of the nutrition decisions for their households. While we all know about the roles that women play as consumers and producers in food systems, we're increasingly thinking about their role as leaders in the food systems and as critical players about reform that we all know is needed to this system and what a future equitable, inclusive, resilient food system might look like. We have a terrific panel of women food systems leaders joining us today to talk about this very important topic. But first, want to mention a few housekeeping items. I know, like we said, we've been in this pandemic a year now, so I think we're all Zoom experts. But I want to remind everyone that the event today will be bilingual. One of your will be speaking in Spanish. So please do go to the bottom of your screen and select your language, English or Spanish, for the event today, and that will ensure that you have seamless interpretation. Panelists may be switching languages. Following the discussion, we will be taking questions from the audience, so please do submit those throughout in the question and answer box, and we will hopefully get to as many of those as we possibly can. The session today is being recorded, and it is on the record. The video recording of the session will be available after the session. And we also encourage you to engage with us on social media. Please join the conversation using the hashtags IWD2021 and hashtag food systems. So thank you so much to the Global Food Banking Network for convening this event. I would love to now introduce our panelists. We have with us today Dr. Melissa D. Ho, Senior Vice President, Freshwater and Food with the World Wildlife Fund USA. We have Dr. Jemima Njuki, who is Director for Africa at the International Food Policy Research Institute and lead for Gender Level of Change with the United Nations Food Systems Summit. We have Ana Isabel Mendez, who is the Executive Director of Bancos de Alimentos Panama. And then finally, we have Lisa Moon, the President and CEO of the Global Food Banking Network. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me. It is great to be with you all today. I'm so excited for our conversation. Lisa, I would love to go to you first and hear a little bit about the role that food banking plays in the global food system, and in particular, how women leaders play a role in that system and how they have been so key to this response to COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. And thanks again for being with us, and just really honored to be with all of you today. So I think, Teresa, your points really kicked off that women and girls, although disproportionately affected by hunger, they are also really key change agents and leaders as we think about how to make food systems more inclusive. And I know that Melissa, Jemima, and Anna are going to speak to this even better than I, but we know that women make up a significant percentage of the world's food producers, working at all points actually in the agri-food supply chain, and that you mentioned as mothers, they greatly influence the nutritional status of their children in addition to determining what they eat in their household. And as community leaders, they also play a big role in interacting with natural resources. And this is really, I think, as we think about the food system, of course, chief at our minds is food access. And how do we make sure that the incomes of those working in the food systems are truly living wages? But then also, how does the food system interact with the environment? And so women are really at the nexus of many of these issues that we're excited to be talking about today. So from at least from a food banking perspective, the food banking model, it's a community-based model, and it really looks at how do we take wholesome edible surplus in the system that for whatever reason is not saleable, and then redirect it at the local level to those that may not be able to access it from the commercial supply chain. So it's really kind of working on both sides of the environmental issue through addressing food loss and waste, and then also thinking about how do we, as a stopgap measure, provide access to people that may not be able to access their full household food needs kind of through that commercial system. Prior to COVID-19, the food banks that we serve, which are across 1,000 communities in 44 countries, we're providing meals to about 16.9 million people facing hunger annually. A little more than half of that number was comprised of women and girls. And really, even in 2019, food banks worldwide saved about 3.75 million metric tons of nutritious food. And that really translates to preventing the emission of about 12.39 billion kilos of greenhouse gases. Now, to me, that means that's about the equivalent of taking about 2.2 million cars off the road. So although I think food banks worldwide are united in our mission to improve food access, we also have in the back of our minds this important environmental angle about how do we play a small role in a food system that currently wastes about a third of all that food is produced, and really take that surplus and match it directly with need. During the COVID crisis, really over the past year, and I'm saying that because it was a year today that the World Health Organization declared that COVID-19 would be a pandemic. Of course, there has been a significant increase in demand for food bank service in every market that GFN is supporting. A lot of that increase has come from women and girls. And I think that's really for two reasons, mainly because the informal labor market was really dramatically impacted by the pandemic and continues to be, and women tend to be working in the informal market at a greater percentage than men. And also women are responsible for a lot of the childcare responsibilities, the majority of the childcare responsibilities, and with children being out of school and the majority of countries, that has undoubtedly impacted women's ability to be earning income for their family and taking care of their families. Over the past year, the food banks have provided meals to an approximately 27.6 million people within the network, again, which is a very significant increase. And we're continuing to see that level of demand in about half the markets that we support. So that being said, we know that there is a real issue with food access, especially as we go into 2021. And even as the economy is recovering, we anticipate this will continue to be an issue. But I want to go back for a minute before turning it back to you, Teresa, and really highlight that women very much so have been change agents in this environment. I joined the Global Food Banking Network 5 years ago, and when I joined, approximately 15% of the leaders of the food banks that we partner with were women. Today, that number is 40%. It's higher if you take into account the number of food banking organizations that have female chairs. And these are incredible women working in all different cultural contexts, leading very significant hunger relief efforts at scale. One of them today is with us, Anna, who leads Banco de Alimentos Panama, and she'll talk specifically, potentially about some of the great strengths she brings to the table, but also challenges as working as a woman within the food system. So definitely, as we think about our network and how we're living our values, our belief that women are key partners in changing the hunger scene, we very much so have convictions about women in leadership. And so, and I think, and I'll just say this, I think that that transition has really made us better service providers, simply because of how we're talking to the clients that we're working with. You know, one of the I went to visit our partner in Amman a couple of years ago, to Katamali, a fabulous food bank that works at 240 different locations around the country. And they're really unique. They actually do parcel delivery directly to households. And I was speaking there to the executive director, and just asking, you know, how are you determining what do you put in these parcels? You know, what's your intel on that? How do you make sure that it's a dignified, you know, delivery in that way? I said, who do you talk to? And he was explaining to me how they do client surveys and everything. And he said, and of course, you know, when we talk to the household, we make sure we speak to the mothers, because, you know, they are the ones that really know what the household needs. And so I think that from a feedback loop perspective, having more women leadership, especially at the food bank level, has made us stronger as an organization and stronger in terms of service delivery. So really excited to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a really great scene setter. I feel like, to tell us a little bit more about food banking and how it works, as well as really outlining the scope of this problem. And it really is everywhere, particularly over the last year. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and actually have gotten involved with my local food bank over the past year. And, you know, we have some of the wealthiest counties in the entire country of the U.S. right here in the DMV, and the need has just skyrocketed. It's absolutely astronomical. And so the role that, you know, local food banks are playing obviously can't be denied in our current situation. Ana Isabel, I'd love to go to you next to learn a little bit more about your experience leading the food bank in Panama. Your food bank served almost 200,000 people last year, which is an increase of over 300% from 2019. So that really shows you as well, you know, how much needs have skyrocketed over the course of the pandemic. So Anna, tell us a little bit more about what it's like to be, you know, a female food systems leader leading your food bank, and what are some of the challenges that you all have faced over the last year with meeting the need in your communities?
Claro que sí, muchas gracias, Teresa. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, sharing with this excellent panel of women. In fact, I've been in charge of the food bank in Panama for over 5 years now. And absolutely what we lived last year with the COVID crisis was it was a learning experience. It was a growth experience for me and for my team in a country, like Lisa said, where thousands of people do not have access to formal employment due to the family responsibilities that they have to take care of. Furthermore, the pandemic really increased violence, family violence, and of course, being a mother, being a wife, and at the same time being a woman leader of a food bank has been a challenge. We have to respond to the pandemic. That has been a huge challenge. It has been a personal and professional challenge for me. But at the same time, I consider that it has been a great opportunity to demonstrate the important role that women play. Building food systems that are more equitable and a more solidary world. From the beginning of the pandemic, just to give you a little bit of context, in Panama, before the pandemic, we had 400,000 people that lived with food insecurity in Panama. With the pandemic, this number tripled. What I mean is right now we have over 1 million people living with food insecurity. And this, of course, is a result of all the restrictions, the lockdown, the quarantine, the suspension of all economic activity for months and months at a time. And that generated a crisis. A lot of women have lost that informal income that they used to have, that they used to support their families. From the beginning, we always had, we were very aware that it was very important that the food bank, despite all the circumstances and despite all the challenges, we knew that we had to respond to the crisis, because if we knew beforehand that this would affect the food access of thousands of people that were living in a very precarious situation even before that. So, as you well know, the COVID crisis wasn't just a health crisis for the country or for the world. Of course, it has exposed the profound inequalities, social inequalities, economic inequalities that we have in our countries. And hunger is a very sensitive issue to all of us, but it has a very special impact for women. As we mentioned, they have to work, they have to support the families, and they're the ones that have to take care of their families. They're the ones that make the decisions for the family, decisions about feeding. Many times they make these decisions alone, as mom and dad at the same time. And at the same time, they are the most involved in their own communities to be able to lead those initiatives and to be able to carry their communities forward. So, um, as leaders in Panama, as leaders in the food system in Panama, what we try to do is to have very clear goals, very clear, very concrete goals that would allow us to really focus not only on maintaining our team protected and motivated at the same time so that we could work on these goals, but at the same time, we had to achieve three main goals. One of them was to create these strategic alliances, partnerships that would provide food to us very fast and in a very timely manner to reach the most vulnerable population, children, women, senior citizens that were already living in poverty before that. And also we had to make all the different sectors aware of what the problem was so that we get other partners, companies, corporate partners, and make them understand that the health problem was crucial, but also the food issue was a very crucial topic that we had to work on. And the other thing, we had to organize donors and volunteers so that we could achieve the procurement and the transportation of all these food items to the rest of the country. So all of this we did by facing a lot of challenges at the same time. We had a very strict shutdown that wouldn't even allow our own personnel to move around. Our organizations, our partner organizations, the ones that donated the food or took the food to the beneficiaries, they were not allowed to deliver the food. Many times we were not able to pick up the food or deliver the food, especially in those areas that are the hardest to reach, where people were not able to get any kind of help or assistance from the state or from anybody else. So even though things were not easy, we knew from the get-go that the bank was not going to be able to close and that we had to respond to the situation. We made a number of changes to all the processes and the structure, the organizational structure. The operation was doubled. We used to see about 300 organizations, beneficiaries, and we reached like 400. That was the number that we reached last year. And we were getting like 100 requests per day from families, from individuals, people that had no access to food. And they would call us. We were the only solution that they had in order to meet their food needs. So we worked very long hours. We could not rest. We really had to sacrifice a lot of family time to do that. And really, we had to make a double effort, living with stress and insecurity, and the fact that we really didn't have enough information about the virus itself and any certainty about when we were going to be able to go back to normal. But from the beginning, we had the unconditional support of our directors, and of course GFN, the Global Food Banking Network, was crucial. They were next to us, they were with us, they working with us, not only providing financial support but also advice, continuous advice on how to do things. We look for partnerships with unions like the Social Development Union in Panama. We started a campaign. It was a campaign where we made sure that we could take food to 30,000 people, mostly women and children and senior citizens. We worked with them for about 9 months. Today, the campaign is still alive and we are still helping a number of people through it. So after doing all these efforts, and I can tell you that about 6,500 tons of food were delivered And that's a lot more than what we had done in 2019. And we were able to reach 200,000 people. So for us, this represented a huge opportunity. So with all this experience, with this learning experience, especially everything had to do with being able to talk to women, being able to talk to all the leaders of the beneficiaries. This is over 51% of the people that we were talking to, all these women leaders in these organizations, and visibility that we received, because the media in the country really opened a lot of doors so that we can continue forging new partnerships, and we can keep fighting so that food systems in our countries can be transformed, and they can become much more sustainable systems, more inclusive, and especially to be able to be a reference point in the country to solve hunger.
Thanks so much, Ana Isabel. That was a really great view from the ground. And wow, all the things that you guys have accomplished in the last year are really amazing. I can't believe you've seen food insecurity triple. That's really remarkable, and all the work that you've done to meet that need. I want to pick up on that sustainability piece that you just mentioned and bring in Melissa on that. Obviously, that's something WWF is working on, and is also a main pillar of the Food Systems Summit. You know, how do we not only ensure that everyone has access to safe, healthy, nutritious food, but that the production and, you know, transportation and all of the systems around the food are not hurting our planet. So Melissa, tell us a little bit more about WWF's work to freeze the food production footprint, and what role are women specifically playing in that effort?
Right, thank you. I want to just start by saying, you know, WWF's mission, and people know us by this iconic logo of a panda, but may not always realize that we're working front and center on food security, on ag development, and on community-based work. So our mission is a world where people and nature thrive. And that means that we align behind the Sustainable Development Goals, and we really do want to see a world where everyone has access to healthy food, clean water, sustainable energy. But as you noted, we also know that these are the two biggest drivers of degradation and loss on our planet, especially of biodiversity. So our work really is focusing around addressing those two threats, agriculture and infrastructure. And we really do it not just because it's important for the species like pandas, you know, like tigers, you know, like elephants, even though it is, but it's also because those places, the biodiversity, the ecosystems that those creatures need to survive are the same systems that we as humans and humanity needs to survive to further sustain our food production, our clean water, and our energy in the future. And so it really is about our own self-interest, and our work very much puts people at the center. So I think we are seeing this in a very much more complex way. I appreciated you bringing up the Food Systems Summit because it's a two-way interaction when you think of ag and infrastructure, and that we can't just think about, we do think about what ag's impact is on the planet and nature and biodiversity, but it's also what nature's impact is on ag. And so we've seen a lot of the impacts already. We have extreme weather events, the flooding in the Midwest over the years, the heat and drought, and the temperature changes, even the snowstorms and the freak things that happened in Texas recently. But we also are seeing a steady decline of biodiversity loss, and that's one of the things that WWF tracks along with others. And that's not just, alarm bells going on, that there's systems failure happening when you see this around the world. It's also loss of pollinators and what it does for loss of productivity of our corn crop in the US, and loss of basic ecosystem functions that threatens, agriculture. It's also loss of topsoil and soil health. And now with COVID, I think Lisa mentioned at the beginning, it has devastated the food system. You see the impacts on people, but the source of COVID is a very complicated one, and it's just another sort of upstream signal of our broken relationship with nature as well. So our work really is looking at putting the people in local communities who need to be empowered to have better stewardship of their resources. Women are front and center. I love the themes that are emerging from the other two speakers. You know, women are impacted and they are vulnerable and threatened, but they're also the change makers and leaders in their communities at the grassroots level, but also in, you know, big organizations like Lisa. And so I feel like there's a lot of different themes and threads of why empowering women's voice, decision making, and leadership is critical. But I want to just, you know, I have some specific examples of our work that I'd be happy to share, but instead of doing that, I have to say just a couple days ago, I think, you know, on the margins of International Women's Day, WHO, right, which has been tracking and really front and center on COVID, WHO just a couple days ago released a report, a public health concern report about gender-based violence against women. And it was shocking to me, you know, where 1 in 3 women worldwide have been threatened with violence against them. And that is a major public health threat. So on the one hand, I was thinking of my work and our work at WWF as securing some basic needs and functions for women, which is food, water, you know, energy. But when this report came out, I think I stopped and thought, you know, a more fundamental thing than even those things is your safety and security. And so I feel like that is something in all of our work, we don't take for granted that women feel safe in any environment, you know, not just the most marginalized women. When you think of 1 in 3 women in the world threatened with violence and safety, I feel like that is something, you know, me personally, I'm trying to now think about what in my work do I need to do to lift up that issue, in addition to the decision making on natural resource management, food security, nutrition, household access, all of that. All of these things go together. So let me stop there with that, and would love to pick up the conversation with the other panelists as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Yeah, that report really was stunning. And thanks so much for bringing that into the conversation, because that really does show how interconnected all of these issues are, right? On its surface, you might not think, oh, violence against women has much to do with the food system, but it really plays into, you know, the rights and access to fundamental basic needs that women have all over the world. And you were also talking about the, you know, changes we've observed with the weather, you know, more intense weather patterns. That's something I've seen firsthand in my reporting. I spent a lot of time, well, before the pandemic, I spent a lot of time in Central America, in the Northern Triangle countries specifically. And, you know, that's just one example of many regions in the world that really have been hit by the changing climate, the dry corridor specifically. Rainfall patterns are different. You know, the cycles that people count on to be able to plant particular crops are now totally off, and you might have, you know, one of the yearly harvests completely fail, and then your family is food insecure, and, you know, perhaps you are then selling off other assets, you know, to make up for that in the meantime, and then you have multiple years of failure, and you find with no more assets to sell. And that obviously is a huge issue. And, you know, the region, not only Northern Triangle, but all of Central America at the end of last year got hit by those 2 hurricanes in quick succession. That has severely disrupted food security as well. And so, you know, all of these issues really are so interconnected. And, you know, that's one of the goals of the Food Systems Summit, is to really pull in a lot of these areas that traditionally really have been siloed. You know, nutrition has been siloed from health, has been siloed from sustainability, and we haven't necessarily all seen them come together and talk about one unique food system. And I do think that, again, over the last year, it really has demonstrated the fact that this is a global integrated issue, and we just simply cannot continue to carry on separating them, because we're not going to solve the problem. So Jemima, I'd love to bring you in on that note to talk a little bit more about the Food Systems Summit and, you know, the particular role of gender in the Food Systems Summit, and, you know, why that was sort of singled out as a cross-cutting issue. Why is it so important that we are thinking about that specifically when we're talking about the goals of this summit?
Thank you so much, Teresa, and thanks for having me. I think one of the first signals that we saw to show the centrality of gender equality and women's empowerment for the summit is by the Secretary General's appointment of the Special Envoy, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, somebody who's working on these issues for many years. And that was a big signal to the food systems community that this summit was going to be different. But I want to talk about 4 key areas that really prompted, and 4 key issues that really prompted this centrality of women's empowerment and gender equality in the summit. The first one is the fact that over the years, we've seen the evidence, we've seen the projections that there is a very strong correlation between gender equality and the ability of food systems to deliver nutritious, healthy foods to all in a sustainable way. We've seen countries that have high gender inequality also being very food insecure. And so these two are really intertwined. You cannot work on food systems transformation without focusing on gender equality for a lot of reasons that most of you have talked about, the roles that women play, the disproportionate impact of food insecurity, food shortages, hunger on women and girls. So that was very clear from the beginning. The second one is this role that women play across the food system, because they're producers. We know, for example, close to 50% of the labor in agriculture is provided by women. In some countries, that can go as high as 60%, 70%. They are processors. You go to the fisheries sector, and it's predominantly women who are processing fish and ocean products. They are traders. They are in the markets, urban markets, rural markets, helping to move food from rural areas where it's produced to urban areas where a lot of it is consumed. They are processing forests products for consumption. They are consumers, but they are also scientists. Yeah, they are leaders. They are policymakers. And so it was sort of inconceivable that we would think about a food system summit without thinking about women's voices and how to bring these women's voices into the conversation. But then we also know that they are doing all this with a lot of barriers. A lot of smallholder women farmers are producing food on land that they do not own, on land that they have no control over, on land rights that are so precarious that they can change from season to season or from year to year, depending on whether their marriage status changes. Yeah. So we know they're facing all these barriers. There are social norms that are, determining the position, the condition of women, how society views women. That's why we have gender-based violence that Melissa was talking about earlier. And so the idea was that we need to be very, very intentional about how we address gender equality and women's empowerment across all the action tracks, all the conversations, all the propositions that were going to come out of the Food Systems Summit. And as a result, we focus very intentionally on 4 key areas. It's building women's agency and making sure their voices are being heard. It's making sure we are addressing their access to and control over resources, whether that's land, whether it's finances, whether it is technologies, whether it is extension services. The third one is making sure we are addressing some of these norms and institutional barriers. How do markets function? What are the gender issues around how unequal markets are? And the third one is on policies, to make sure that gender equality, women's empowerment is anchored in food systems policies, whether it's land policies or trade policies. Now, the third reason is, as I mentioned, women's leadership and women's voices, because it's sort of, how do you talk about food systems if you leave out half of the people that are engaged in the food system, half of the people that are making so many decisions within the food systems. You have to have their voices. And so we've also been very intentional about making sure that it's not just the leaders in food systems who are speaking, or the women leaders, that we are also hearing the voices of women in the grassroots. So part of the work of the Change Lever has been to go around the globe, having these dialogues with women rights organizations, with women producers, with women working on forest and forest products, with women in the fisheries sector. So we had an Africa dialogue on February 9, with the Pan-African farmers organizations, with the African Women in Agribusiness Network, bringing all these leaders together to really say, what are our priorities? When we say a food system that works for us, what is it that we want to see? We've had one in South Asia and Southeast Asia with Self-Employed Women's Association in India, with the RICO TFC that works with the forest-based, with communities that are dependent on forest. And what happens is when these priorities come out, we feed them directly back into the action tracks that are developing the propositions that are going to come out of the summits. And the fourth reason is that, we talk a lot about the role of women, what women do, the decisions they make, why they need to be on the table. But we never talk enough about how systems themselves need to serve women better. What is it that needs to change in our systems? And so we have a very intentional focus in thinking, what is it that we need to change in the food system itself so that it works for women? Whether it is how people think about jobs in the food system, how do companies make sure that they have decent, equal pay for women who are working in food systems within those companies. So we are also looking a lot at the institutional side of it, at the system side of it, and what needs to change there so that it works for women. And because I sit in IFPRI, we are also trying to use evidence to say what works, what doesn't work, how are we going to track progress? Back to you, Teresa.
Thank you so much, Jemima. I love your framing of looking at it as a systems perspective and, not just sort of singling out particular pieces and saying, oh, what can one particular woman farmer, what's on her shoulders to improve her particular situation? But how is this all connected and how does it play into the systems role? I think that's really, really important when we're having these conversations. I want to remind everyone you can be submitting your questions through the Q&A box. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. And this question I really love. The international community has been talking about the importance of empowering women for decades. What are some of the major barriers preventing women from accessing higher levels of leadership? And what is needed to bring down those barriers? Ana Isabel and Jemima, I'd love to hear from you both on this question. Ana Isabel, if you want to go ahead.
Sí, claro. Bueno,
Well,
las mujeres
obviously, women suffer in most countries from the inequality. They don't have the same rights. They have salary, wage inequality. They're not taken into account for many things. They have had to live pretty much on the sidelines regarding any important issue. They haven't been able to make any decisions. However, they are the ones that make all the decisions within their household, what people will eat. They are the ones that carry most of the work forward. They have to take care of their own families, and not only their family unit, but their extended families as well. And they have to support their families. They're the victims of family violence. And especially now with COVID, where domestic violence has increased due to the quarantine. And this has made the situation even worse than what it was before. Because, of course, when you're in that situation, many times women have been left alone trying to balance all of these chores and duties, taking care of their families and the jobs they have to do outside the home, and they lost the opportunity to do many things, and they have to be part of the informal economy if they have to support their families, and things are a lot harder for them, a lot more difficult, because they're not taken into account. And women perhaps are more, or they're the group of people that interact the most in their own communities. They're the ones that are the most involved. They're the ones that see the problems and try to solve them, but they're never taken into account. They're not in leadership positions, neither as part of the government nor any other society sector. So that is what makes them very unable to change things when, from their own place, they really are the ones that do all the work, and they should be able to push all these initiatives to achieve a more equal society, or a more equal world, and a more inclusive society. So I think that the role women play, and they have demonstrated that they're great home managers, they're great managers, and they also have the capacity to respond, uh, their own solitary response. They're able to respond to any situation that happens in their own society, in their own community. So we should be able to utilize, and we should be able to give them the opportunity. So we should let them change food systems. And like Dr. Jemima said, we have to take into account their voices, what they have to say, to know that they are in the front line. They're not only taking care of their own families, but they're also taking care of everything that's going on. And, in terms of production, in terms of jobs, and everything that has to do with leadership in society.
Thanks so much, Ana Isabel. And Jemima, I'd love to still hear from you on that too, and maybe sort of looking at the particular food systems summit lens and how, you're working to break down barriers in that way. Because, as a questioner said, we have sort of had this goal as the international community of, empowering women for so long, obviously with limited success in particular ways. So I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. One of the interesting conversations that happened during COVID is how the countries, even in countries like India, the states that had women in leadership, how well they handled the pandemic. And so I think it is not in doubt about women's capabilities in leadership, their ability to lead, because we've seen them lead. As Ana Isabel says, they're leading in their homes, they're leading in their communities. So why aren't we seeing more of them at international level, at national level? And we've focused a lot on the women themselves, as I said earlier. We've done leadership programs, training programs, mentoring, and that is all critical. What isn't changing quickly enough is how society perceives women's leadership. And that has to change. And it has to change through a very conscious engagement, including of men and boys, about women's leadership, about gender equality, about women's empowerment, and why it's important for households, for communities, and for countries. The other thing that needs to change is, even when women take up leadership positions, whether in science or other areas, the burden of unpaid care work is also not shifting quickly enough. So they are having to take all those roles without their care burden easing. So there needs to be a huge effort to also address unpaid care work by recognizing the value and especially the economic value of care work, but also by reducing it, either through technologies, through investments. Why are women still spending so many hours fetching water when we could be making investments in ensuring easier access to water. But more importantly, we have to redistribute unpaid care work. It cannot just be the responsibility, or the major responsibility of women to care for children, to care for the elderly, to care for family members. And this is where the engagement of men and boys is so critical in terms of how they see unpaid care work and the extent to which they participate in unpaid care work. And we have to get men to also see this as of benefit to them, that it is a release for them when they can also be able to engage in unpaid care work. And the third area that is not shifting quickly enough is on policies. And I would argue that we actually even need affirmative action in terms of women's leadership, because when you are trying to address historical imbalances, it is unlikely that this gradual process that we've been going through the last few years is going to work. It is much more likely that we'll have to take some really drastic actions. I'm seeing that within our science network, saying, okay, if we're going to have women leading, scientists leading an initiative, we want to see a man and a woman taking co-leadership of that initiative, because we need that critical mass. And women are there. We are there. Look at us. We are qualified women, and there's so many of us others out there that actually are seeking these leadership positions. But some of these norms and barriers are not changing quickly enough.
I wish I could high five. I wish there were icons and
yeah. I know. Sometimes I feel like we need like an aggressive emoji feature on Zoom so that you can react appropriately to people's comments. Thank you so much, Jemima. That was great. And actually, next question is for you as well. Our questioner asks, focusing on Africa, what system and processes would you recommend putting into place to support women in the fight against hunger?
I think we need to think about that question at different levels, right? Because if we focus on smallholder farmers, one of the things that annoys me, I'm hoping we can use all of now. Yeah, one of the things that annoys me is agriculture in Africa is still dependent on something called the hand hoe. Now, when I was in school, the hand hoe, those pictures of Mesopotamia, and they had these drawings on walls, the main instrument of agriculture production 2,000 years ago was the hoe. And we're still depending on that. So we need technologies that actually reduce the drudgery of agriculture, but that also increase productivity and the efficiency in which we do agriculture. So that's a huge piece. And with digital technologies, it's becoming much easier, because not every woman farmer needs to own a tractor. Probably all she needs is a mobile phone to be able to access a young person in the continent, because that's also something we have abundance of, young people who are tech savvy and who are so connected to the technology world that she can then use to hire a tractor, or to hire some mechanized service, to hire a thresher for her beans. So we need to focus on technology a lot and make sure that our technology is reaching the millions of women farmers that need them. And we can harness the power of digital tools to make sure that happens. But it will require a lot of investments by governments and the private sector. Now, when you think about women who are entrepreneurs, access to finance to grow their businesses. And again, this is an area where we've been focusing on, let's train women to be bankable, literacy skills. That's very important. But how many financial institutions are actually designing for women-owned businesses? Given the nature of women-owned businesses, sometimes they tend to be smaller, sometimes they tend to fluctuate depending on what are the needs and and priorities and constraints that women are facing. So how can we have more financial institutions actually designing for women, designing products that actually work for women-owned businesses. So there is very targeted interventions that we have seen work. We've seen, for example, in Tanzania, organizations working with banks to actually make sure that the banks understand the needs of women and priorities of women, and actually design for them. Digital tools that are coupling different things that women need. At IFPRI, we have a project here in Kenya where you are combining market information with insurance, with information on how to produce better crops, and with a banking solution that actually combines all these services in ways that they are accessible. They are accessible to women. But at the bottom of it, we also have to make sure that we are harnessing women's collective action and women's agency, because they are also not just there waiting for solutions. They have to be part of the solution themselves. So there's a lot that we can do and that we've been doing, but it needs to get to a scale where it's actually making a difference for women.
Melissa, I'd love to bring you in really briefly. We don't have a lot of time left on that piece as well. And I hear a little bit about sort of the WWF perspective of making sure women have access to all of those things, some of which Jemima just mentioned, that will allow them to be successful.
Yeah, we have a more than 10-year partnership with a really fantastic development NGO, CARE, which a lot of folks probably know. And thinking about the community lens of not just the problem, but really the solution sets of responsible conservation and stewardship of natural resources, women's groups come up front and center. So we have examples of really powerful projects with fisher folks in Mozambique, and really looking at alternative livelihoods when overfishing has been done, setting up community engagement and really empowering these councils where women have leadership roles to think about when and how to implement no-take zones, as well as alternative livelihood approaches. Same thing with deforestation in Tanzania. And again, I feel like there are broad themes that we bring up about making sure the 4 areas that Jemima mentioned, I think are totally right. The cultural, social norms, agency and women's voice and ability for decision-making, control and access to assets, as well as all the training and technical assistance, all of that is key, as well as real policy levers. And we also just need to mention data collection, just tracking and measurement, gender disaggregated data to really understand and make sure we know, there are unintended consequences, even though sometimes we have good intentions for having impacts on women. We need to at least have data, policies, and accountability for course correcting if things aren't going the way that we think they are. And so, yeah, that's front and center. And while we have big themes on the ground, there's not a one-size-fits-all bullet. Women, women are not a singular monolith, and so we need to be able to create space and have the diversity of women's voices at the table, so that these local solutions can be empowered. But yeah, that's where I think we are. And the only other point I wanted to mention is it's been more to the first question that came up more globally in the development space, where women's empowerment has been talked about for years. I'm biased because I worked for her, but it was more than 25 years ago that then First Lady, Hillary Clinton noted that women's rights are human rights. And I just also wanted to lift up what Jemima was saying, that the day that women's rights aren't considered women's issues, when it's a societal issue, that we start to see the linkages between why this has been bad for all of us, not just women, and what the benefits and value, as Jemima had also noted, what the benefits to society will be, men and women. Will there be change? And then I also couldn't agree more with Jemima that we also can't wait for that realization to happen. It will be, change and power structures and dynamics, and seeding those things is slow and going to not happen, not just for women, but so many other marginalized groups too. And that we need to take the reins and have some proactive affirmative action programs to create that change faster.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think that important point about these issues not being women's issues is so key. It is an issue for everyone, and how do you engage men and boys on these issues, and not just have this being a conversation always amongst women, but really involving everyone, and like you just said, Melissa, making people see how this is beneficial for the globe as a whole. We have just a couple of minutes left, so we're going to do a really quick lightning round. Same question for everybody. I'm going to give you each 30 seconds, okay? 30 seconds to give your response to this question. And then unfortunately, our time is up. So the goal of the UN Food System Summit is to envision the food system of the future. As female food system leaders, what do you think needs to happen to transform our food system and make it more equitable, resilient, and responsive to the needs of all people? Lisa, I'll go to you first on that one.
With only 30 seconds, I think I'll have to be quite brief. I'll touch on one aspect, and I think I really think, and I'm not just saying this because I'm really involved in food banking at this moment in my career, but we have got a real issue of surplus and need, and we have to find a way to bring those two pieces together. And I think doing that is going to honor all of the labor and the efforts that go into the production system. It respects the natural resources and the limitations that we have. And it also takes, I think, really honors the fact that we have a lot of people that need access on a regular basis. So that would be my one charge from a takeaway from my perspective.
Great, thanks so much. Ana Isabel, let's go to you next.
Sí, para nosotros.
For us, the same thing. I believe that we have to promote policies that generate changes in the consumption patterns and production to ensure access to food for everybody. They have to be produced responsibly and environmentally safe manner, but you have to reduce the waste and food and loss of food. At the end of the day, we waste and lose a lot of food that could be given to those people that really need it. And you produce a lot of food nowadays that, however, doesn't reach those people that need the food. So we need more regulation about that, and we need a change in consumption and production. And that would be interesting, because we need that in order to achieve that.
Great. Melissa, 30 seconds.
Yeah, everything the previous two have said, and I think the part I would add is that we change the narrative about who the villains are in the story, and that it's not producers and farmers that are the problem and the footprint, and with their GHG and their water use, but it's really empowering what the system needs, and that's all of us to change. So the choices we make on what we buy and the production systems where food comes from, as well as our consumption and the choices, on waste and loss, it's connecting the dots. And I think there is a piece, as hokey as it sounds, that each of us can empower ourselves and not just look at, who's at fault on the other part of the chain. We need to connect the dots.
Indeed. Thanks. Jemima, now to you. Final 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll talk about these 4 things that I'm so passionate about, that we have to build women's voice and leadership. We have to think about the access to and control over resources, because without this, we will not move. We've got to change society's perceptions of women and their capabilities and the norms that hold them back. And we've got to anchor all this in policy, because if we anchor it in policy, then they get their legitimacy from policy.
Amen to that too.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks to all of our panelists and our guests from around the world for participating, sending us your questions. It's clear from our conversation today that we've seen what an important role women play in all different parts of the food system. And, this year, Building into the Food System Summit is a real opportunity to rethink the food summit to rethink the food system, as well as the role that women are playing in it. So I really appreciate you all sharing your insights today. To all of our participants, later today you'll receive an email with a link to the recording of our event today. So please do share it with anyone that you know that might be interested or was unable to make it this morning. And thanks so much again to the Global Food Banking Network for hosting us. You can learn more about their work on their website, foodbanking.org. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. Thank you so much for joining us.